All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. Welcome to session 2, where we've got Mr. Dan Ortman and we've got Candace Dubois. Is that pronounced properly? Candace?
Correct.
Awesome. Thank you. And yeah, let's take it away. Over to you.
All right. Everybody hear me okay? It's coming through? All right. Thank you, Ben. All right, so culture adoption and executive sponsorship. We hear a lot about culture or culture of accountability and adoption and change management. All of these things are really difficult, and it's really difficult to say what this actually means. So what we hope to do today is give a little bit of our perspective, share a little bit about what we've learned, both from the customer side and from the consultative side. And so we just started really looking forward to sharing that with you. Before we get into it, there's 2 questions I want to ask really quick. So one, how many in this room are FinOps certified practitioners? Just by raise of hand. Awesome, most of the room. And then the second is, who in this room, before seeing us as a sponsor for the FinOps Foundation, has heard of SoftwareOne? Okay, about half of the room. Okay, I always find it really interesting who has or who has not heard of SoftwareOne. And I'll get more into that in a minute, why that might be important for this talk. Okay, by way of introduction, my name is Dan Ortman. I lead our FinOps practice at SoftwareOne. I've been at SoftwareOne for over 8 years, but came to SoftwareOne from the customer side. So I have a background in IT leadership. It was before cloud, whenever I was leading IT, but still nonetheless. What we've done over the past several years at SoftwareOne, I'll get into it in a little bit more, but we spent a lot of time building cloud governance in our cloud FinOps practice. And again, I'll get into a little bit more why that's important for our discussion. But I'm really looking forward to the talk.
Good, and I'm Candace Dubois. I'm a FinOps senior consultant with SoftwareOne, and prior to joining SoftwareOne, I was with a large company who had a great deal of multi-cloud spend. And I became a certified practitioner in 2019. We like to joke that I was the 100th person. So I was an early adopter, and I was a lone wolf. When I brought this back to my company, they're like, Fin, what? Okay, you do you, and we're glad that you got another certification. So I really, really can relate to those of you who might feel, I don't know how to move this forward, I don't know how to get this going, nobody understands my pain. So that's kind of where I come from.
Thanks, Candace. Okay, so we're going to jump right to the punchline here. This is one of the statistics that we wanted to share. I'll tell you exactly what this means and how we got to this number in a minute, but 45% is the statistic. And what this really is how many across different individuals in an organization have general agreement across their cloud strategy. So that we find this incredibly interesting. So it's only 45% that agree. Now, how we got to that, that kind of comes back to if you knew who SoftwareOne is. So SoftwareOne is Microsoft's largest licensing partner in the world. And why that matters is in about 2017 timeframe, we started to see Microsoft going to our, to customers, and when they were negotiating their enterprise agreement, they were saying, hey, why don't you add this commit to your enterprise agreement, and we'll give you a discount on Office 365. So we started seeing all these commitments but not being consumed. So there, our customers started coming to us and saying, "Hey, we've got a couple $1 million here committed to Azure. We're not using it. We just did it to get this discount. But hey, by the way, how would you recommend we start leveraging some of this?" So we actually started building a cloud governance program at that time because we really started getting asked these questions, and so we did that to support it. And so what we ended up developing was, it wasn't called FinOps Diagnostic at the time because FinOps didn't exist, but our diagnostic workshop was all about getting that alignment from the security teams, from the infrastructure teams, from finance, from procurement, because cloud impacts all of them, as we all know. So once we started diving into this a little bit more, and we kept hearing over and over again that these different teams were not aligned, we thought, well, how can we actually measure that? How can we actually start doing something with that? And so this 45% actually comes from these workshops. And so you might be saying, well, how the heck can you tell me how much agreement we actually have on these teams? Well, the way that we deliver these workshops is they're half-day workshops, and we require all of these different individuals, these different personas in the workshops. And a lot of times, this is the first time they've ever been in the same room or the same workshop together talking about their cloud strategy. So when we're asking questions, there's people in the room that think, well, yeah, we're all on the same page, or yeah, I've told everybody this or that. And the truth is, once we start asking questions in this interactive session, what we end up finding is they're not all on the same page. And during these sessions, we find over and over and over, when they see that there's some people over on the no side or some people on the yes side, they're like, well, hey, the people that said no, why are you saying no? Like, we've talked about this, or there's this general disagreement. So that 45%, we feel like that's a really important number, because when you start talking about culture and adoption and change management and all of these things that are critical, that we keep hearing over and over again already today, we keep hearing over and over again that are critical to implement a FinOps practice. Well, if everybody's not on the same page in the first place, then that gets really difficult just to start. So the 5 C's of FinOps is something that we created to start talking about, well, what is the first step? Where do you start to start getting this alignment? So that's where the 45% came from. And so then we like to start with, so where do we begin? And whether this is physical, virtual, or just figurative, what we're seeing based on these workshops is that all of these different teams generally are on a different page, one way or another. And so the goal of FinOps, the goal of this cultural adoption, and change management is collectively getting these different teams onto one strategy and on one page, one floor, if you will, from a figurative standpoint. And so the 5 C's, this is what we really want to spend the time during this session on. We came up with these to kind of talk through what are the most important things to start off with. This isn't about replacing the 6 core principles of FinOps or anything like that. This was just, we started taking note of where do we begin after we've had this workshop that now they understand, well, we're not all on the same page. In fact, over half of the questions we weren't on the same page. So we'll start with culture of accountability. This one is so huge to me. This is, it's got to be, such a focus for any FinOps practice. And, one of the things that we've already heard several times today in the keynotes, that we'll probably hear 1,000 times this week, is getting engineers to take action is the number one challenge. I've got a couple of quick stories on that. One is, and this is just a short one, but it's really interesting when you start getting on calls where engineers are on the call, or maybe there's engineers in this room. The engineer's response to that is, well, it's easy to start pointing fingers at the engineers. But the reality is that engineers, they're doing what they're being asked. They're doing what they're KPI'd to do. So, just like any of us in this room, if we're going to get bonused on something, or if it's going to be what's going to get us promoted, for example, we're going to focus on that. And so for an engineer, that might be hitting SLAs or uptime, or for DevOps, getting your sprints done on time. It's not how much money did I save. That's not going to get their bonus. So creating this culture of accountability, there's so much involved with it. But even if there's communication out, but the KPIs are, I'm going to get bonused on hitting these SLAs or uptime, then why would they take something down to spend money, or why would they not have as much resources or many resources as they needed in order to achieve that goal? So this culture of accountability, so key. And what we want to do in each one of these 5 C's is sort of talk about the utopia versus reality. And the utopia with culture of accountability, just imagine if every single individual in an organization that impacts cloud spend was treating it as their own business. If that was their mindset, how much that would change so many decisions that are being made. Because a lot of people just have sort of a blank checkbook. One of my favorite engineer stories that I've had on a call was, and this was a couple years ago now, but he said, look, it's easier for me to spend $10,000 in the cloud than it is to buy a $10 mouse. If I buy a $10 mouse, I actually have to go ask my boss, hey, my mouse is going out, I need a new one. Okay, go ahead and buy it. Go to Amazon and buy the mouse, download the receipt, submit the receipt to Concur, then my boss approves it, then finance approves it, then at some point I get $10 back in my paycheck. But I can go right now and spend $10,000 in the cloud, no problem. So that shift is so huge. And so creating this culture of accountability, creating the mindset where you're treating it as it's your own business is such a shift. And it's not what a lot of these engineers or developers are being asked to do yet. So Candace, let me turn it over to you. When you were starting up this practice, what did crawl look like to you? Where was the starting point for you?
So, excuse me, culture of accountability looked like a FinOps practitioner holding myself accountable to what I owed other people, and just the same holding other people accountable to what they owed me. When we hear about these, getting engineers to take action, how much of that frustration could be alleviated if we actually chased down the core reasoning behind it, like Dan spoke of? And that's what happened to me. Inactivity. I couldn't get them to do these optimizations. So I finally went up the management chain and I said, okay, we have this initiative. What's the reason? And he gave me a very valid example that for some workloads, when we look at the iron triangle of quality, speed, and cost, they intentionally chose speed. So cost was not a factor. So by the time I got that answer, I was able to wrap a bow around it and I was satisfied. So my frustrations were alleviated when it came to that specific example.
All right, so the next C is communication. And there's actually another C word that this could have been, which is change management. So adoption and change management, ACM. Adoption and change management can be so huge, but when you think of the change management, so when you're trying to get people to think about their cloud spend as their own business, when you're trying to make this big shift, when you're changing KPIs, having that executive sponsorship, having the communication is so critical. Things like changing people's KPIs, this has to be a real top-down approach. And of course, when we talk about utopia, not utopia, having that executive sponsorship is the utopia, because that's not where everybody is at. So the utopia of communication would look something like you've got the executive sponsorship, you've got an organizational change management program in place, so you've got change sponsors that are communicating about FinOps, you've got people championing FinOps in these different teams. Sometimes that means different business units, different parts of the organization. Mergers and acquisitions is something that we're seeing a ton of, where there's two completely different cloud environments that have two completely different strategies. So how do you start communicating across those? So this can look like having video communication, emails, Yammer, Slack, all these different ways to communicate. That's so important that that's all coming out and it's consistent, and it's also got that top-down approach with the organizational change management. Otherwise, if it's just something that is communicated out once on a Yammer post, that's not going to change what anybody is doing. Mm-hmm. So this consistent communication and having these change sponsors and some real organizational change management makes such a difference in the speed at which you can shorten that curve of getting the FinOps practice stood up. So if that's the utopia, Candace, what was your reality like?
So my reality was things that I was doing for the betterment of my job, whether it was building, I lived solely in the inform phase. I was all data driven. So if I was creating dashboards or I was introducing some new kind of data, instead of just doing it and going on with my job, I made a point to communicate to others who might benefit from this information as well. I would hold maybe some demos or some little recorded sessions just to get the word out. Because when we look at that 45%, if people just communicated what they were doing naturally as part of their job, their cloud goals, their cloud initiatives, we would see a drastic increase in that percentage because more people would just be aware.
All right, our third C is centralized team. So, Actually, there was a kind of a conversation about this in one of the keynotes. The centralized team, this one is such an interesting one because it means something different. The utopia of a centralized team is different in every organization. In some organizations, this might be completely functional. So everybody has their own full-time jobs, but they're also part of the centralized FinOps team. Other organizations, like we heard this morning, it could be 30 or 40 people on this team. But whatever it means, the one thing that's the common thread, no matter whether it's direct line reports, whether it's these functional roles, is that this team is communicating and evangelizing out to all of the different areas of the business. So again, if we go back to the finance and IT and the DevOps and all these different teams, that whatever this centralized team is, that they're out there evangelizing this continuously. It can't just be just a one-time thing. So to us, the utopia of the centralized team, of course, it's depends on what size complexity the organization is, but once you've got that defined, having this team defined and enabled to communicate out what FinOps is and what the value is, aligned to how KPIs are changing, and all of the things that we've already been talking about. It's so important that team has the representation from across all these different groups. That's more of the utopia. But again, Candace, what was your experience with this?
I mean, I can't fake this one. Either I have a team or I don't have a team. But what I did find is that by using effective communication and collaboration, I can start to promote team style thinking. And what that did is, as you gain adoption and as you gain executive sponsorship, this team is already starting to take shape. So you don't have to have a team to start with, but you'll find your key people who become your skeleton team. They want me to move over. Sorry.
Yeah, and another thing on this, a lot of times when we bring up centralized team, the first question, especially from a leadership group, is what is this going to cost? Am I hiring FTEs? So, having that ability to start somewhere and grow, the crawl, walk, run here is super important. Okay, continuous improvement. I love this topic, and this can, we kind of have broken this down into two buckets. So with continuous improvement, on one hand, you can look at this from a technology standpoint. So, in many cases, the first migration might just be a lift and shift. So a lot of it might just be infrastructure as a service, and you're focused on your RIs for your virtual machines. You're focused on maybe right sizing and some of these things that are a little bit more low-hanging fruit that you can easily assess. But as you progress in the technology stack and you start using more cloud native services, and you start modernizing the applications, how does that start changing the optimize phase, right? So your optimization strategies change, and then think 5 years from now, or think 5 years in the past. Think how far we've come, and what in 5 years, what new technologies or what new strategies will need to come out. So this is, it's something that these kind of build on each other, because this centralized team has to keep continuing this process. I always tell people it's not a linear start here, then you end here, and now you have FinOps. It's continuous improvement. So from a technology standpoint, technology is always changing, which means FinOps always has to change. But also, there's continuous improvement from a practice standpoint. So your FinOps practice will continuously improve. Your the culture around it, the communications, all the things that we've been talking about. So there's kind of two tracks that we see as continuous improvement, and that's why we always talk about crawl, walk, run. We love that that's part of the FinOps framework, and it's just a continuous, ongoing thing. So from your perspective, Candace, how did this look starting out your FinOps practice?
So because I lived in the inform phase, more on the finance side, I didn't have control over the technical aspects of continuous improvement. But what I found is that even within your own silos and your own cloud roles, you can continually improve your processes. You can look at the things that you do every day and just strive for your own continual improvement. I mean, this doesn't have to be a team sport. And the worst case is you've done your job well, and you've made it easier and better for yourself.
Okay, and the final C is collaboration. So what's really interesting about this one is I do think it's kind of like some of the other C's are a prerequisite, because the collaboration will start to come naturally once you have some of these other things in place. Now, why this is one of the C's, why this one made it, and why it's so important, I think that I've heard actually in a couple of the talks today already this get brought up. The more that you're engaged with the engineering team, the more you're engaged with the DevOps team, the more you deeply understand their application needs and what their KPIs are and what their priorities are. We talk about the iron triangle a lot when we're presenting FinOps. So for us, we present it as you've got your speed, your cost, and your quality. And a lot of times the priority is all three, but you've kind of got to choose. So if speed is the most important thing, then that gets communicated, and sometimes there's a sacrifice of cost. If it's a customer-facing production workload, then maybe quality is the most important thing. Nothing else matters more. This has to be up and running. We know that's going to cost more. That's fine. So being able to collaborate at a deeper level, and there's lots of other examples like procurement. If procurement is negotiating a contract with one of the vendors, if there's licensing investments, so like on Azure, hybrid benefits, should we buy more licenses to use hybrid benefits, or do we stop having maintenance on our licenses because we're moving into the cloud? Like all of these questions, it takes that collaboration to know, what does that really look like? So this collaboration, it comes with some of these other C's, but as the FinOps practice matures, the collaboration between these different teams becomes so critical to go from that crawl to walk to run. So that's kind of our utopia. So Candace, from your perspective, what did this look like for you?
So the end result can be the same, whether you're part of an established practice or you're a single practitioner. You just have to go about it manually. So it just takes a little more legwork to bring these people in to manually drive the conversations that may not be happening automatically. So the nice thing is collaboration is one of those things that with a little feeding and watering, it just grows on its own, because the people that you invite to collaborate with you start relying on this, and they start learning that, this really can be, I love the expression collaboration is multiplication, because it's nice to be able to have that type of group thinking, and it will grow and become easier. And before you know it, just by gathering these people, you will have an automatic, set meeting or set schedule or set framework.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll go to Q&A now, and I think we're just about right on schedule. So
20 minutes.
Would love to hear feedback or questions.
If we could have raised hands for a microphone, and I'll give that to you.
Is there anybody who's had one specific challenge with one of these C's, or has found success with one of these C's? No? Does anybody share
Yeah, I was just going to say, great presentation. I love the content. I'm just curious from, your experience, is there one that you have found, hey, if you're going to start tackling, the first step is this C, and that really builds the foundation? Is there one that you would recommend?
I'll let you go first if you want.
Collaboration. Absolutely collaboration, because collaboration, accountability can come from that. When you're on the phone with these people, it's easy to ask, well, how are you doing with that? Or what happened to this? So you can find answers easier with collaboration. So accountability comes. The centralized team will start to form, because you've got your key stakeholders that you're talking to regularly. So communication, you're already collaborating, so you're already communicating. So that's where I would start. And I found comfort in other misery.
It's another C word, comfort.
Comfort, yeah. When we started talking, then I realized other people had pain too, so it was another way to evangelize.
You mentioned a level of cloud spend that would require a full FTE or would support an FTE. Have you found that cloud spend dollar amount that would,
That's a really tough one to answer. I think it's partially, maybe where you're at today, but then also what does the roadmap look like? So I would say what we're really seeing is when the amount is somewhere, I would say maybe around 2 million annual consumption is when we're starting to see roles that are cloud cost optimization or even FinOps. That's where we're starting to see a role that we're working directly with somebody that all they do all day long is FinOps or cloud cost optimization. But we've seen way different numbers, lower and higher than that. But I would say that would be the most common that I would say.
I would guess at that level, you're kind of paying for your own salary with the savings that you end up finding for the company?
Absolutely.
That's what I'm finding.
And I think FinOps in general is just like in FinOps, we make business cases for migrating workloads to the cloud or innovating in the cloud. I think you can make a business case for standing up the FinOps practice and you can easily justify salaries from the practice itself.
First of all, thank you for the great presentation. You focus a lot on collaboration and communication. A similar question to what I've asked before to others. How would you, and you mentioned how engineers do not act because it's the KPIs that we come up with do not impact their bonuses or paychecks. So how have you created certain KPIs or how you have communicated that has worked well for you so that engineers and the architecture and the applications team, they start acting in a better fashion and have more accountability to this?
Yeah, there's quite a few different ways that we've seen accomplish that. You can of course there's things like the most common like show back, charge back, that sort of shame back, that sort of thing. But also specifically when it comes to KPIs, and I think this is a just super interesting conversation. If you think of like a bonus structure, maybe where all of their bonus went into, uptime or SLAs or something like that previously, maybe part of that bonus, maybe half of their bonus becomes cost savings or things like that. And that's why the executive sponsorship is so important because you're not going to get, somebody on the FinOps team isn't going to be able to change somebody's KPIs, right? So that's where that executive sponsor comes in. So I think it's a combination of, how you're surfacing and presenting the data, what's made available to them to action on, but then also, everybody is going to do what, is going to get them promoted or get their bonus or that sort of thing. So you've got to find a way to impact that. And, everybody's different in that way, so, yeah.
I did have one thing to add on that. One metric that we found very useful when we started sending out optimization opportunities to the engineers, and we found that their response wasn't what we had hoped it would be, we created an unrealized savings KPI. So had these recommendations been acted upon when we made them, here's how much money you would have saved. It was in the millions very quickly. Now we realize that, okay, this has to go through a feasibility analysis. We have to, we can't take all of it. But that was amazing 6 months down the road when we said, look, you guys could have, $500,000 less a month if you had just acted upon some of these. So that helped us.
Yeah. Quick question. So it sounds like from what you said that cost transparency is a big part of
Yes.
Culture and accountability. I want to piggyback on what you said. Can you comment on your views on chargeback versus showback? And the second part of that is what is the impact it has on culture?
Wow. That's a really big question.
Yeah, that is a big question. In fact, I would go as far to say is I've had organizations say chargeback would go against our company culture. So it's not even an option. It's not even on the table. So I think it's a very company by company basis. I think you could argue that chargeback is the quickest way to drive change because that's going to start hitting somebody's KPI, somebody from a leadership level, their KPI. So that's going to start trickling down changes to everybody else. So I think, chargeback is a quick way to do it, but a lot of times that's not going to align to the way an organization operates. They just wouldn't operate that way. So, I think it's a really big question, but okay, we've got 1 minute left. It's a really big question. I do think chargeback is one of the quickest ways versus showback, but I don't know if you wanted a quick comment.
No,
on
but
it.
you can grab me because we had a robust chargeback model where I came from, so I can talk to that in cost transparency.
Awesome, thank you.
And you mentioned the whole sending engineers the optimizations. So did you have a maturity process where, like, in the beginning, it was just an email with an Excel of the recommendations, and then eventually did you think about automating that notification, whether it's Jira ticket or ServiceNow ticket?
So it was an Excel spreadsheet that we were sending them. We were exporting it out of whatever tool we were using at the time to get that out to them. And at the time that I left, we were hoping to teach them how to fish. Teach them to recognize their own opportunities by educating them on the tool. So we didn't strive for, sending more optimizations. We kind of changed our focus to education. How can we educate them to realize them on their own? And at the same time, we were also getting more management buy-in and more sponsorship. So it all kind of led down the track.
Awesome. Thank you ever so much, Dan and Candace. Please, let's show our thanks.
Thank you.
Awesome.
JR here from the FinOps Foundation. Thank you for watching. Please go to FinOps.org if you want to get plugged into this amazing community. And of course, hit subscribe right here on YouTube to get all the future content. Hope to see you soon.